Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story.
Subscribe, like, and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
By the time I pulled into the driveway that evening, the sky was already starting to fade into a soft orange, the sun dipping behind the expensive rows of newly built houses that all looked like someone tried to copy a magazine cover. There were cars parked up and down the block, music floating faintly through the open windows, laughter pouring from the patio, and the unmistakable scent of catered hors d'oeuvres wafting through the warm air. From the outside, everything looked picture-perfect. Elegant wine glasses clinking, string lights twinkling in the backyard, women in carefully coordinated outfits snapping photos with their phones. If you didn't know any better, you'd think this was just another happy family celebration, a sister beaming with pride at her new chapter in life, and a supportive older sibling showing up to toast her success. But I knew better. I knew exactly what was underneath all that polished veneer, and I was only there for one reason: to watch it all unfold, slowly, precisely, and with the kind of calm silence that people never see coming until it's already too late. I stepped out of the car, smoothed my dress, adjusted my jacket, and put on the same expression I always wore when I walked into a room full of people who thought they knew me, just enough warmth to seem polite, just enough distance to keep from getting dragged into anyone's emotional mess. I walked through the front door without knocking, just like she would have wanted, and I smiled when I saw her. Sabrina, standing in the center of her grand new living room, surrounded by half-drunk guests and fake laughter, glowing like a damn chandelier in a house she had no business owning. She looked up, saw me, and lit up like she'd just won a prize she didn't deserve. She walked toward me with her arms open, all teeth and charm, and said, "Claire, you made it." Of course I made it. I wouldn't have missed this for the world. But before I let you get too comfortable in this little scene, let's rewind exactly 1 month. Just 1 month ago, I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping coffee and going over some monthly reports for a client, when my phone rang. I almost ignored it. Just another unknown number, but something in my gut told me to answer. It was my bank. A soft-voiced man on the other end asked if I had recently authorized several large transactions totaling over $50,000 across 3 of my credit cards. I remember staring at the wall for a few seconds before asking him to repeat it. $50,000. My breath caught in my throat, but I kept my voice steady as I said, "No, I absolutely did not." He told me the charges had all gone through within a 2-week window. Furniture, appliances, a down payment to a real estate agency, and even a professional interior designer's retainer fee. I hung up, heart pounding, already suspecting what my brain hadn't yet accepted. There were only 2 people with access to those cards, and I wasn't one of them. The next day, she showed up at my door like she was dropping by for coffee. She waltzed in wearing new designer sunglasses and a smug little grin on her face like she'd just pulled off a brilliant prank. I hadn't even said a word before she let out a giggle, tossed her bag on my couch, and said, "Sis, I used your credit cards to buy my dream house." She actually laughed, loudly, shamelessly, like it was some inside joke only she found funny. "Don't freak out," she added, waving her hand like it was no big deal. "Mom and Dad said you'd understand. They said you've always been the practical one." I stood there in silence, staring at her, my hands clenched just slightly behind my back so I wouldn't betray the explosion brewing in my chest. I didn't scream. I didn't throw her out. I didn't tell her she was a selfish, entitled leech who'd been riding on my back since we were kids while I played the responsible one cleaning up her messes. I just smiled. Not a big smile, not a fake one, just a thin, quiet curve of the lips that told her absolutely nothing. And I said, "Congrats. I hope it's everything you wanted." She hugged me. Can you believe that? She hugged me like she thought I was proud of her. Then she pranced out of my house and into her new fantasy life, completely oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath her had already started to shift. That night, after she left, I poured a glass of whiskey instead of wine. I didn't cry. I didn't scream into a pillow or call anyone to vent. I just sat down at my laptop, logged into my financial dashboard, and started shifting funds quietly, methodically, one account at a time. I moved my savings into a private investment portfolio. I secured my business assets in a holding company under a different legal name. Then I opened a brand new account and labeled it something simple, Phase 1. Because this wasn't going to be a fight. No, that would have given her too much satisfaction. This was going to be a lesson, one she would never forget, and one I wouldn't have to raise my voice to teach. And I wasn't even close to done. People like to say family is supposed to be your safe place, your foundation, the one thing that stands firm when everything else in your life falls apart. But for me, family was more like a job I never applied for, but somehow got stuck with anyway. Growing up in our house was like starring in a play where the roles were assigned before you even learned your lines. I was the responsible one, the calm one, the dependable one. The one who folded the laundry before being asked, who kept a chore chart taped to the fridge, who studied late into the night while Sabrina snuck out the back door to meet whatever boy was giving her attention that week. And no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried to be the one they could be proud of, it was always Sabrina who got the spotlight, even when she hadn't earned it, especially when she hadn't earned it. I started working part-time when I was 15, tutoring after school, helping out at the local bookstore, babysitting for neighbors who trusted me more than they trusted their own relatives. I saved every dollar, put myself through college with a patchwork of scholarships and sheer grit. I graduated with honors, got my first job 3 weeks after walking across that stage, and I never looked back. Meanwhile, Sabrina flunked out of 2 different colleges before she turned 22, burned through every cent of the college fund our parents had set aside, funds I didn't even know existed when I was applying for loans, and still managed to come home to a standing ovation. They said, she's just figuring things out, and she's got a free spirit, and not everyone's path is the same, Claire. I remember the day she totaled the car. It was a mid-sized sedan I had co-signed for because our parents didn't have the credit and she didn't have the income, and I didn't want to see her stranded. That was my mistake, thinking if I helped just this once, maybe she'd grow up, maybe she'd feel grateful, maybe she'd finally stop making everything harder than it had to be. She called me from the side of the road, crying hysterically, blaming the weather, the traffic, the brakes, anything but herself. The car was a total loss. The insurance barely covered half. The loan remained. I paid it off quietly over the next year while she pranced around in a new vehicle our parents helped her buy 3 months later. I never got a thank you, never an apology, just a shrug and a, "You're the responsible one, Claire. You can handle it." And that line, that poisonous little phrase, was the soundtrack of my entire life. You're the strong one, Claire. You've always been the one with her head on straight. Your sister just needs a little more help. It was never said with malice, but it always carried weight. Weight that crushed me quietly while everyone else acted like I should feel lucky to be so capable. They treated my strength like it was endless, like it was some factory line that would keep producing support and forgiveness no matter how much they took. And I let them. For years, I let them. Because I thought that's what family meant, holding up the people who can't hold themselves. But the truth is, Sabrina didn't need help. She needed consequences. She needed someone to tell her that charm and manipulation don't count as currency in the real world. She needed someone to look her dead in the eye and say, "You're not owed anything just because you've gotten away with everything." And now, for the first time in my life, I was finally ready to be that someone. She's always had a talent for crying at the right moment, twisting her voice just enough to sound wounded instead of guilty, turning every mess into a story where she's the misunderstood one and everyone else is just too harsh to see her heart. And for years, it worked on our parents, on her boyfriends, even on me. But now that little performance wasn't going to save her, because something shifted in me the moment she said, "Mom and Dad said you'd understand." That sentence echoed in my head like a slap. Not just because it was arrogant, but because it revealed something deeper, something I couldn't ignore anymore. It wasn't just Sabrina who felt entitled to my support, it was all of them. They had built this quiet, unspoken agreement that I was the fallback plan, the safety net, the one they could count on to fix whatever she broke and never make too much noise about it. But not this time. This time, I wasn't going to fix it. I wasn't going to quietly pay off the debt or sit through another dinner where my mother sang Sabrina's praises while asking me when I planned to settle down, like it was a moral failing that I preferred independence over cleaning up someone else's mess. No. This time, I was going to take my silence and use it like a weapon, not out of spite, but out of necessity. That night, after staring at my financial dashboard for what felt like hours, I opened a new tab and started researching property ownership records. I found the address of Sabrina's new house, pulled up the loan documents, and saw exactly what I was hoping to see. Her name wasn't on the deed yet. The loan hadn't fully closed. There were legal gray areas, a tiny crack in the wall she was so busy decorating, and I was going to wedge that crack open until the whole thing caved in. Because sometimes being the strong one doesn't mean holding everything together. Sometimes it means knowing exactly when to let it fall apart. There's something oddly fascinating about watching someone bask in a life they didn't earn, especially when they have the nerve to act like they built it brick by brick with their own bare hands instead of someone else's credit card and years of accumulated favors they've never repaid. Sabrina's new house wasn't just a house, it was a monument to entitlement, a polished, overpriced display of everything she thought she deserved simply because someone else had worked hard enough to provide it. Every wall was a trophy. Every light fixture was a declaration. And every inch of it made my skin crawl, not because it was too grand or too extravagant, but because I could see, with stunning clarity, how confidently she wore that illusion of accomplishment while having no clue how fragile it really was beneath the surface. She invited me over just 2 days after moving in, acting like she was doing me some kind of favor by letting me see what my money had purchased. I showed up with a bottle of wine and the kind of smile you wear when you're at a funeral, pretending the person in the casket was a saint even if you knew they were a jackass. She greeted me with a squeal and threw her arms around me like she hadn't committed financial fraud and laughed in my face about it. "Isn't it amazing?" she beamed, gesturing toward the vaulted ceilings and open concept layout like she'd laid every tile herself. "I just feel like I'm finally stepping into my power, you know?" I nodded, keeping my expression smooth, hiding the low burn of rage bubbling in the pit of my stomach. I walked slowly through each room, listening to her chatter about how she was going to host dinner parties, start a lifestyle blog, maybe even launch a home decor YouTube channel. As if spending someone else's money had suddenly transformed her into Martha Stewart with a Pinterest addiction. She gushed about the imported Italian tile in the master bath, the quartz countertops in the kitchen, the high-efficiency washer and dryer set she absolutely couldn't live without. All of it purchased with the swipe of plastic she didn't earn and wouldn't be paying back. Every detail she shared, every smug grin she flashed, only strengthened my resolve. I kept my hands clasped behind my back, casually scanning the walls, the fixtures, the paperwork lying on the counters. I asked simple, pointed questions between sips of wine. "Did you get title insurance?" I said, watching her face closely for the flicker of confusion I knew would follow. "Did the closing attorney walk you through the escrow disbursement?" I asked later, nodding toward the unopened folder sitting beneath a vase of fresh peonies. "Are your loan funds fully disbursed yet?" Some lenders delay until after the first utility inspection. Sabrina waved me off each time, eyes glossing over like she was trying to remember the lines in a play she never bothered rehearsing. "Oh, I think so," she said vaguely, brushing aside my questions with a flutter of her manicured hand. "The mortgage guy said everything was good. I just need to sign one more thing next week, I think." And there it was. The detail I'd been waiting to confirm. The one piece of information that made everything else fall neatly into place like dominoes in a straight line. Her name wasn't on the deed yet. The loan hadn't fully closed. It was still in what the banks call pending verification, meaning any financial red flag or legal complication could stall the process, throw it into underwriting hell, or even trigger a full reassessment. The house wasn't fully hers yet. Not legally. Not technically. Not permanently. I stayed for another 30 minutes, sipping wine, nodding through her monologues about color palettes and garden plans, silently memorizing the layout of each room, the brand names of every appliance, and the placement of every security camera. By the time I left, she was already planning a housewarming party for the following weekend. "You'll come, right?" she asked as I stepped toward the front door. "I want you to see how I turn this place into a home. I want you to feel proud of me." I turned to her, smiling just enough to make it sting, and said, "Of course. I wouldn't miss it for the world." I got into my car, shut the door, and sat still for a moment, letting the silence wrap around me like armor. Then I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the contact list until I reached the name I hadn't dialed in almost a decade, a high-end real estate attorney I once worked with during a property dispute for a former client. The man was ruthless, methodical, and not cheap by any means, but he knew every loophole in the book and had a reputation for unraveling property deals with a smile on his face. I hit call. When he answered, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I need to file a lien," I said. "And I need it to hold." He chuckled softly on the other end. "That kind of request usually comes with a story." "Oh," I replied, glancing back at the house through my rearview mirror, watching the soft glow of lights through the windows and imagining the chaos to come. "You're going to love this one." Because what Sabrina didn't know, what she couldn't possibly understand, was that dream houses built on lies always come with cracks. And I was about to make sure hers shattered right through the foundation. There's something deeply satisfying about working in silence while everyone else around you keeps mistaking your calm for surrender, your quiet for compliance, your stillness for weakness. I didn't want a confrontation with Sabrina. I didn't want to yell or argue or put on a dramatic performance about betrayal and boundaries and bloodlines. I wanted a clean win, a silent, surgical dismantling of everything she'd built on my back without ever realizing how unstable her little castle really was. Revenge, for me, was never about fire and fury. It was about precision. It was about pulling one thread at a time until the whole thing collapsed, and all she could do was stand there in the ruins, wondering how she never saw it coming. I started where most people wouldn't think to look, inside my own financial records. I went through every credit card transaction she had made in my name, cross-referenced it against her receipts, traced every delivery, every service charge, every payment made toward the down payment or closing costs. She wasn't even subtle. The furniture store listed her full name on the invoice. The appliance retailer delivered straight to her address. The interior designer included notes on her vision board in the final estimate. She left a paper trail so obvious, even a first-year law student could have built a case. I compiled everything into one neat, well-organized folder, labeled it with the date she first admitted what she'd done, and quietly shared it with my attorney. Not to file charges. Not yet. Because pressing charges was never the plan. That would have been too direct, too chaotic, too easy to spin as cruelty or overreaction. No. What I wanted was subtler, slower, more insidious. I wanted her to feel secure first. I wanted her to believe she'd won. I wanted her to decorate every room and throw her little parties and hang her framed inspirational quotes about manifesting abundance, while the ground beneath her feet was already starting to crack. And the best part was, she'd never hear the sound until it was too late. My attorney reviewed the documents in less than 48 hours and called me with a plan so precise it almost made me laugh. "You ever heard of a mechanic's lien?" he asked. "We'll use a variation of that, completely legal, rarely contested if the documentation's clean. You won't even need to go to court unless she tries to sell or refinance. It'll freeze everything right in place." He explained how we'd use a lesser-known clause in property law that allowed creditors, or, in this case, victims of fraud with substantial documented damages, to file a temporary lien against a property tied to misappropriated funds, even without a criminal conviction. Once filed, it wouldn't transfer ownership, but it would lock the property into a legal limbo, throwing any ongoing financing into chaos and triggering red flags across her mortgage application. Basically, I was tying a rope around her dream house and slowly pulling it tighter, 1 inch at a time. We filed the lien on a Thursday afternoon. The documents were sent via certified mail the next morning, addressed directly to Sabrina, signed and sealed with all the dull formality that makes legal trouble feel more real than any screaming match ever could. Of course, she didn't read it. She never reads anything that doesn't come with gold foil lettering or a discount code. She probably tossed it into a pile of unopened mail while she planned her housewarming party menu and ordered monogram napkins. That weekend, I joined my parents for dinner, a quiet, predictable affair where the air always carried the faint scent of overcooked beef and passive aggression. They spent most of the evening gushing about Sabrina's new life. My mother went on and on about how Sabrina finally seemed settled, how she was coming into her own, how proud they were of her resilience, her taste in decor, her positive energy. I nodded, sipped my wine, and offered small polite comments like, "That's nice," and "She's certainly made the place her own," while inside I counted the hours until the lien hit the county registry. No one asked me how I was doing. No one mentioned the fact that my credit had been ransacked or that I'd been left holding the financial wreckage of Sabrina's fantasy life. No one seemed to care that their golden daughter had stolen from me. In fact, I don't think they ever even saw it as theft. In their minds, I was just fulfilling a role again. The strong one. The capable one. The one who always handles things. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't handling it the way I used to. I wasn't sweeping it under the rug or swallowing my anger or writing another damn check to keep the family peace. I was building a trap, and they were all too busy celebrating to notice the walls closing in. Later that night, I met Maya at our favorite late-night diner, the kind of place where the coffee tastes like it's been brewing since the morning shift and the waitress always remembers your name but never asks questions. I slid into the booth across from her, dropped my purse beside me, and grinned the kind of grin that only comes from knowing something no one else does yet. "She's going to scream," I said, stirring my coffee slowly, the spoon clinking against the cup with deliberate rhythm. Maya raised an eyebrow. "And you're going to enjoy every second of it." I didn't say anything for a moment, just sat back in my seat and watched the steam rise from the cup. "Not enjoy," I finally said, tilting my head slightly. "Relish. Because justice isn't always about revenge. Sometimes it's about letting someone dig their own grave and handing them the shovel with a smile." The first thing I noticed when I pulled up to Sabrina's house that evening was just how hard she had tried to make everything look perfect. There were fairy lights strung from the roofline to the fence posts, candles flickering in hurricane glass on every step, and small clusters of guests already gathering on the front lawn, clutching their wine glasses and laughing just a little too loudly. From the outside, it looked like a Pinterest board come to life, a curated vision of domestic bliss, designed to impress, dazzle, and distract. She'd clearly gone all in on the image, the performance, the illusion that she had somehow arrived, that she had earned all this comfort and elegance through effort instead of theft. I stepped out of the car slowly, straightened the hem of my tailored blazer, and lifted the sleek black gift box from the passenger seat. It was glossy and neatly wrapped in ivory ribbon, looking expensive enough to spark curiosity, but vague enough to avoid suspicion. Inside, of course, there was nothing, just an empty box lined with tissue paper, a perfect metaphor for everything Sabrina stood for. Style over substance. Sparkle without soul. She wanted a show? She was going to get one. Just not the one she thought she was hosting. When I stepped through the front door, I was greeted by a wave of perfume, music, and meaningless chatter. The house was packed with people I recognized only faintly, friends of our parents, coworkers I'd met once at a holiday dinner, former classmates who somehow still circled Sabrina's orbit, all gathered here to celebrate her so-called success. She was floating through the crowd in a satin dress, glass of champagne in one hand and a rehearsed laugh in the other, complimenting outfits, accepting praise, soaking in the attention like sunlight. And not a single person in that house knew what was about to hit her. When she spotted me, her eyes lit up with practiced delight. She glided across the room, arms outstretched, all smiles and fake sincerity. "Claire, you look amazing," she gushed, kissing the air near my cheek. "I'm so glad you came." I handed her the gift box with a warm smile. "I wouldn't miss it," I said, and I meant it in ways she didn't yet understand. She placed the box on the gift table without opening it, already distracted by another guest who wanted to tell her how fabulous the house looked. I moved through the room like I belonged there, nodding politely, sipping my wine, accepting compliments about my outfit, and offering vague praise about the food. Every time someone mentioned how Sabrina really pulled it all together, I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. The tension under my skin hummed like electricity, steady, patient, waiting for the switch to flip. Eventually, she gathered everyone near the back patio to show off her latest project, the backyard remodel. "You guys have to see it," she said, practically bouncing with excitement. "The landscaper just finished, and the new fire pit is unbelievable." She pushed open the French doors, beckoning the group outside into the soft glow of sunset and string lights. People followed with their glasses, chattering, unaware. I lingered at the back of the crowd, standing near the open door, just close enough to see her reaction when it happened. And then she saw it. At first, she froze, eyes narrowing as she tried to make sense of the glaring neon orange sign stapled to the fence at the far end of the yard. The bold black lettering shouted what her eyes didn't want to believe: foreclosure proceedings initiated, property under lien review, county records pending. The silence that followed was immediate, jarring, and total. The laughter stopped. The music became background noise. And a ripple of quiet confusion passed through the crowd like a slow-moving wave. Someone whispered, "Is this a prank?" Another guest leaned in to read the sign more closely. A few people exchanged awkward glances, unsure whether to laugh or leave. Sabrina turned slowly, her face pale beneath her makeup, her mouth slightly open like her brain was still scrambling to put the pieces together. Then her eyes landed on me. I was leaning casually against the railing, wineglass in hand, posture relaxed, smile small but deliberate. I met her stare without flinching. She stormed toward me, heels clicking violently against the stone patio, her expression a mix of panic, rage, and humiliation. "What did you do?" she hissed, low at first, then louder, drawing more eyes our way. "Claire, what the hell did you do?" I took a slow sip from my glass, let the moment stretch just a second longer, then said, calm as a breeze, "Oh, I thought you'd understand. Mom and Dad said you would." Her jaw dropped. Behind her, guests were already backing toward the house, sensing the unraveling of a party that was supposed to be her victory parade. I could see the storm rising in her eyes, confusion turning to realization, disbelief turning to fury. But I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just watched. Because the beauty of a good trap isn't in the moment it snaps shut, it's in the slow, dawning horror on the face of the person who never saw it coming. There's a particular kind of silence that falls in the aftermath of a public unraveling, a thick, uncomfortable stillness that hangs in the air long after the last guest has shuffled out and the last glass has been abandoned half full on the table. I imagine Sabrina stood in that silence for a while, probably pacing her polished floors in bare feet, staring at the foreclosure notice like if she glared hard enough, it might vanish or rewrite itself into a joke. But what she didn't understand then, and probably still doesn't now, is that some consequences don't show up with flashing lights or courtroom drama. Sometimes they arrive quietly, wearing legal language and fine print, and they tear your world apart without ever raising their voice. By the following Monday, the fallout had already begun. The mortgage lender froze her application pending the lien resolution. The loan officer called her to inform her that the final funds would not be released until the county cleared the encumbrance. Translation: the house was in legal limbo, and any sense of ownership she thought she had was nothing more than a fantasy she'd built on a cracked foundation. The papers she had signed, the paint colors she had picked, the flowers she had planted in the front garden, all of it sat on land that no longer legally belonged to her until someone untangled the mess I had intentionally created. I never intended to take the house. I had no interest in becoming a landlord or forcing her out or repossessing a property that reeked of her ego. That was never the point. I didn't want her house. I wanted her to know how easily it could all be taken away. I wanted her to feel, even briefly, what it's like to build something on shaky ground and watch it collapse when you finally stop pretending everything's fine. I wanted her to understand the weight of consequences, not just because she needed to learn, but because I needed to unlearn the habit of carrying that weight for her. Of course, my parents found out quickly. I should have known they would. They called me the day after the party, voices tight and rehearsed, like they'd already agreed on what tone to use before dialing my number. My mother led the conversation, full of thinly veiled disappointment and emotional manipulation dressed up as concern. "Claire," she said, dragging out my name like a sigh. "Was this really necessary? You've made your point. Sabrina's devastated. She's not perfect, but she's your sister." I stayed quiet for a moment, letting her fill the silence with more justifications and soft pleas. Then I answered, not harshly, not angrily, but with the same calm precision I'd used throughout this entire ordeal. "Maybe she should learn what it feels like to earn something," I said. "And maybe you should learn what it feels like when the daughter who always handled everything decides she's done playing cleanup." They didn't have much to say after that. I didn't scream. I didn't throw accusations. I just told the truth, and in some ways, that landed harder than anything else I could have said. A few days later, I met Maya for coffee again. She was the only person who truly understood the layers behind everything I'd done, the years of buildup, the buried resentment, the invisible labor of being the reliable one in a family that never knew how to appreciate quiet strength. She raised an eyebrow as I recounted the aftermath, the lender's call, the stunned silence from our parents, the emails Sabrina had started sending with increasingly desperate subject lines, and less pride in her voice. "That was cold," Maya said, not in judgment, but more as an observation, like she was still processing the brilliance of it all. "No," I replied, stirring my tea slowly. "That was clarity. I hadn't acted out of cruelty. I hadn't sabotaged her life for sport. I'd simply offered her a glimpse of what it feels like when you're no longer protected by someone else's forgiveness. And I did it without raising my voice, without a single curse word, without any threats or confrontations. Just paperwork and silence. The most elegant form of accountability there is. What I hadn't told anyone, not even Maya, was that the lien I filed wasn't permanent. I'd originally planned to remove it quietly after a few weeks, once I was sure the point had landed and the message had sunk in. It was never about ruining her, just rattling her enough to make her think twice before using someone else's name to build a dream she hadn't earned. But now, I wasn't so sure, because something had changed in me too. I felt different, lighter, clearer, freer in a way I didn't expect. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't the fallback plan. I wasn't the silent accountant holding the family together. I wasn't the reliable older sister who absorbed the consequences so no one else had to feel discomfort. I had chosen myself, and the air around that decision tasted better than anything I'd felt in years. Maybe I would lift the lien next week. Maybe I'd let it sit for a few more months. Or maybe, just maybe, I'd let it stay right where it was, quiet, firm, and unmovable, like the boundary I should have drawn a long time ago. Because funny thing is, people finally start to see your value, not when you give everything without question, not when you carry the weight and ask for nothing in return, but when you stop letting them steal it.